Be not deceived. Yah is not mocked. Whatever a man or a nation sows, that must they reap. The war on drugs was committed by our nation, where they wrote racist drug policies to criminalize drugs they brought to this country. They set up drug dealers. And then their own people don't even get the same treatment. So stop telling me everything is fair.
In the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan brought back many of the drug possession and distribution policies of the Nixon administration. The First Lady, Nancy Reagan, even started her famous Just Say No campaign, which was intended to address the dangers of drug use. The Reagan administration also pushed for smaller government more broadly, arguing that the expansion of social resources like welfare programs and increased funding for community programming contributed to a sense of over-reliance and exacerbated perceived social failings. During Reagan's administration is when we see some of the most severe policies related to drug use in U.S. history. They passed harsh penalties at the federal level and encouraged state legislators to implement these harsh penalties as well. This led to a massive increase of incarceration for nonviolent drug crimes, and these policies disproportionately impacted Black and Latino communities. And many argue that the Reagan administration did actually intend to make some of these policies about race. I mean, they created the welfare queen stereotype, a harmful caricature of a Black woman who used welfare checks and child rearing to take money from the government. While never actually saying that the welfare queen was Black, Reagan relied on pretty racist language to promote this idea and used similar language while promoting the war on drugs. In 1986, Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, which also had very harmful implications for Black and brown communities. It created longer prison sentences for individuals who used crack cocaine, which was typically used by Black Americans, and shorter prison sentences for those who used powder cocaine, which was typically used by white Americans. For example, if a person had 5 grams of crack, it would trigger an automatic 5-year sentence. But a person had to have 500 grams of powder cocaine to trigger the same sentence. So these war on drug policies had a disproportionate impact on communities of color, because it wasn't just Black people using drugs. A lot of people were using drugs, people of all races and all backgrounds. But the presidential administrations in the United States disproportionately targeted and penalized Black and brown Americans for drug use, and penalizing them more severely than they did their white counterparts. To be proportionately targeted and penalize Black and brown Americans for drug use, and penalizing them more severely than they did their white counterparts. To be clear, crack cocaine had a devastating impact on the Black community. It created addictions, deaths, and drug-related crimes, hamstringing many vibrant communities of color. But it is important to address why this was happening. There were huge structural changes happening within cities. This led to white flight, deindustrialization, loss of employment, rise of low-paying service jobs, and general urban blight. Many Black middle-class families also left the cities for the suburbs as well. The loss of jobs and services in the inner cities led to the growth of alternative economies. It also led to crime and social dislocation.
Fair use, fair use. This is for educational purposes.
A bit too much for film. Also imagine the coverage if this was me. Ian Hayworth tweeted, "The smartest man Joe Biden knows videotapes himself weighing crack." Caleb Hull wrote, "You have to be a super weird person to even film this in the first place." Benny Johnson also reposted the video and included a clip of Joe Biden from the archives in 1991 discussing his tough thoughts on crack users.
If you have a piece of crack cocaine no bigger than this quarter that I'm holding in my hand, $1/4 of $1, we passed a law with the leadership of Senator Thurmond and myself and others, a law that says you're caught with that, you go to jail for 5 years. You get no probation. You get nothing other than 5 years in jail. Judge doesn't have a choice. Now,
this video is just another example of incriminating and scandalous things to come from Hunter Biden's laptop from hell.
He doesn't have that same type of energy when allegedly his son records himself weighing up crack on a scale. Shameful. And y'all keep voting for this dude. This is crazy. Allegedly, right? Allegedly.
No, I just read the bag. It's 2.06.
2.07 without the bag.
So how long is the power?
2.0.
That was Hunter Biden there, filming himself. The video was one of the few pieces of content that the image board website 4chan claims to have hacked from the president's son's iCloud account. A Twitter user under the name of NJ Gloper posted the video of Hunter. It sees him filming himself with a cigarette in his mouth. He then flips the camera to film the scales in front of him. As you'd expect, the video has been making the rounds since it was put up.
A man and a woman overdosed on heroin with a 4-year-old child in the backseat and were arrested. The pictures an Ohio Police Department released Thursday are shocking, but they're just one example of a scary national trend.
You reap what
Ohio
you sow.
is among 14 states where heroin overdose rates rose significantly from 2013 to 2014. That's the most recent data available. National data shows the number of deaths from heroin overdoses in 2014 was at more than 10,500. A decade earlier, there were around 1,900. But as the numbers rise, several states and Congress have tried to combat the issue with legislation, but it's uncertain how effective that will be. As for the couple in the photos, they're each facing criminal charges, including child endangerment. A neighbor is taking care of the 4-year-old after child services stepped in.
Old pirates, yes, they rob I, sold I to the merchant ship.
My name is Gary Webb. I am an investigative journalist. I've been an investigative journalist for about 25 years for daily newspapers. And in 1996, I wrote a series of stories entitled Dark Alliance, which was about CIA involvement in drug trafficking. What my story showed was that the cocaine that was being sold in those neighborhoods was coming from mainly one source, and this one source was being used to finance a guerrilla war in Central America. The general idea of the CIA dealing drugs was something that the American mainstream press had never written about before, and that's why it prompted outrage among blacks, among drug reform activists, among politicians, by the CIA, by every federal agency involved in the drug war, because it showed they weren't doing their jobs. There was a fraud. Right after we published the stories, the support we got from the media was very favorable. Newsweek magazine did a big piece on the story and said it was well documented and well researched. The website was getting like 1 million hits a day. There were marches in Watts, there were marches in Compton, there were candlelight vigils. Every California senator demanded an official investigation. So the story itself was really building momentum.
Woe to them who make unjust laws. That's why the opioid epidemic hit just like it's hitting, because of what you have done to the Most High's chosen people.